In 1963, a blind 13-year-old boy became the youngest artist in history to hit #1 on the Billboard charts. What nobody saw was this. At just 11 years old, he had already signed away his future to Motown, locked into a system that controlled his money, his music, and his identity. He couldn't see the world, but the world was already using him. By the time he turned 21, that same boy made a decision that could have destroyed everything. He walked away and took on the entire music industry. This isn't just a success story. It's the story of a child prodigy who realized he was never free, and the war he started to take his life back. By the time he turned 25, Stevie Wonder had already done what most artists spend a lifetime chasing and still never reach. But what made his story different wasn't just success. It was how completely he took control of it. Between 1972 and 1976, he released a sequence of albums that didn't just dominate charts. They redefined what modern music could be. Talking Book introduced a new sound that blended soul with emerging electronic textures. Inner Visions went deeper, darker, more political. Then came Songs in the Key of Life in 1976, a double album so ambitious that it debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, something almost unheard of at the time. The numbers were overwhelming. 3 Album of the Year Grammys in 4 years, tens of millions of records sold worldwide, a creative peak that critics still call one of the greatest runs in music history. But numbers don't explain the shift. For the first time, an artist wasn't just performing songs. He was building entire worlds alone. Stevie wrote the lyrics, composed the melodies, produced the tracks, and played multiple instruments himself. Synthesizers, which were still experimental at the time, became tools in his hands, not gimmicks, but extensions of his mind. The sound wasn't controlled by a label anymore. It came directly from him. And that changed everything. The same industry that had shaped him as a child, controlled his image, his money, his voice, was now forced to follow his lead. Executives didn't dictate direction anymore. They waited for him, listened to him, bet on him. On stage, the image became iconic. Dark glasses, head tilted back, fingers moving across keys with absolute certainty. A man who couldn't see the world, now creating a version of it that millions would feel. But underneath that control, something else was building. Because when someone goes from having no power at all to having complete control, the pressure doesn't disappear. It becomes something heavier and far more dangerous. Long before the Grammys, before the sold-out arenas, before the industry ever learned his name, Stevie Wonder entered the world under conditions that already stacked the odds against him. He was born in 1950 in Saginaw, Michigan, nearly 6 weeks premature. The incubator that was meant to save his life would take something away forever. Due to a condition now known as retinopathy of prematurity, excessive oxygen damaged his eyes, leaving him permanently blind before he ever had a chance to see the world. His first memories were not of images, but of sound. Voices, footsteps, distant noise, silence. Everything came to him through vibration and rhythm. When his family later moved to Detroit, the environment around him was harsh, crowded, unpredictable. His mother, Lula Mae Hardaway, raised him largely on her own, navigating poverty while trying to protect a child who was already more vulnerable than most. But there was one thing she didn't try to limit: his curiosity. By the time he was 4 years old, Stevie was already experimenting with sound, tapping objects, listening closely, repeating patterns. What others might have dismissed as restlessness was actually something else forming, an unusual sensitivity to pitch, timing, and tone. Music didn't come to him as a hobby. It became a language, the only reliable way to interpret a world he couldn't see. At church, that language found structure. Gospel music surrounded him with emotion, discipline, and repetition. It gave him a system, chords, rhythms, call and response. But more importantly, it gave him feedback. When he played, people reacted. When he sang, people listened. That reaction became his first understanding of connection, not through eye contact, but through sound. By the age of 8, he had taught himself to play multiple instruments: piano, harmonica, drums. Not through formal training, but through instinct and relentless repetition. Without sight, he relied entirely on memory and touch. Every note had to be felt, not seen. Every mistake had to be corrected through listening alone. This created something rare, a level of focus that most trained musicians never develop. There were no visual distractions, no shortcuts, just sound and the discipline to master it. But talent alone doesn't stay hidden for long, especially not in a city like Detroit in the early 1960s, where music was becoming both an escape and an industry. At age 11, Stevie was introduced to Ronnie White of Miracles, who immediately recognized that this wasn't just a gifted child. This was something the industry could shape. That introduction led to an audition at Motown, the most powerful black-owned record label in America at the time. Berry Gordy didn't just see potential. He saw opportunity. A blind child with undeniable talent, a compelling story, a marketable image, something rare enough to stand out, but controllable enough to be molded. The decision was made quickly. Stevie was signed, given a new name, Little Stevie Wonder, and placed into a system that had already produced stars. But unlike most artists, he wasn't entering as a teenager or an adult. He was entering as a child, still forming his identity, still learning who he was. From that moment on, his life split in two. On one side, there was a natural growth of a boy discovering his abilities, pushing his limits, finding joy in music. On the other, there was a structured machine that scheduled his time, shaped his image, and directed his output. Rehearsals replaced free time. Studio sessions replaced play. Expectations replaced exploration. And because he couldn't see what was happening around him, he had to trust the people controlling it. That trust would define his early years. But it would also become the first invisible pressure in his life. Because while the world saw a young prodigy rising, something else was quietly being built beneath the surface. A dependency on a system that provided everything, but slowly took ownership in return. Stevie Wonder didn't just grow up learning music. He grew up learning how to survive inside a structure that decided what his talent was worth. And by the time he was old enough to question it, that structure would already have its grip on every part of his life. By the time Stevie Wonder officially entered Motown at 11 years old, his life was no longer moving naturally. It was being designed. Motown in the early 1960s was not just a record label. It was a factory. Artists were developed, trained, polished, and delivered to the public with precision. And Stevie, with his story and his talent, became one of its most valuable long-term investments. The first thing they changed was his identity. Stevlin Hardaway Judkins became Little Stevie Wonder. The name wasn't random. It told the audience exactly how to see him, not as a musician with depth, but as a miracle to be admired, a blind child who could sing, play instruments, and smile through it all. It was simple, powerful, and marketable. And from that moment on, the image came before the person. His days quickly filled with structure. Studio sessions, vocal training, instrument practice, choreography, media appearances. There was very little space left for anything else. Childhood didn't disappear overnight, but was gradually replaced by routine and expectation. Every performance had a purpose. Every song had a direction. Every move was guided. And for a while, it worked. In 1963, at just 13 years old, Stevie released Fingertips Part 2, a live recording that captured something raw and electric. The audience energy, his spontaneity, the imperfections, it felt real. The song shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making him the youngest artist in history to achieve that milestone. The industry celebrated. Motown had its proof. The system was working exactly as intended. But success came with a hidden structure behind it. Financially, Stevie had almost no control. Like many young artists at the time, his earnings were placed into managed accounts. Decisions about money were handled by the label and the adults around him. Creatively, the situation wasn't much different. Songs were selected, arranged, and approved through Motown's internal system. Even when Stevie contributed ideas, they were filtered through layers of control. What made it more complicated was his blindness. Because he couldn't see contracts, rooms, or the subtle dynamics between people, he had to rely entirely on trust. Trust in executives, trust in managers, trust in a system that had its own priorities. And that created a dangerous imbalance. While other artists might sense when something fell off, Stevie had to depend on what he was told, not what he could observe. As he moved into his mid-teens, something began to shift. the little Stevie Wonder started to feel limiting. His voice was changing. His musical instincts were evolving. He wasn't just reacting to music anymore. He was beginning to shape it. He wanted to experiment, to write more, to move beyond the controlled sound Motown had built for him. But the system wasn't designed for that. It was designed for consistency, for reliability, for repeatable success. This created the first real internal tension. On the outside, everything looked perfect. A young star, successful, admired, constantly working. But inside, Stevie was starting to feel the boundaries. He had spent years learning, observing, absorbing, and now he wanted something the system wasn't ready to give him: control. By the late 1960s, the gap between who he was becoming and how he was being managed had grown too large to ignore. He was no longer just a performer. He was a musician with ideas, with direction, with a vision that didn't always match what Motown expected. And for the first time, he began to understand something critical. The same structure that had built his career was also limiting it. That realization didn't lead to immediate rebellion. It led to patience, observation, preparation. Stevie didn't rush the process. He kept working, kept learning, kept building his skills inside the system, while quietly preparing for the moment when he could step outside of it, because he knew one thing for certain. If he wanted real freedom, it wouldn't be given to him. He would have to take it. And that moment was coming closer than anyone around him realized. In 1971, everything changed. Stevie Wonder turned 21. And for the first time in his life, the contract that had defined his entire existence reached its end. This was the moment most artists feared, the moment where security disappeared, where the system that built you could also replace you. But Stevie didn't hesitate. Instead of renewing immediately with Motown, he made a decision that shocked the industry. He walked away. For Motown, this wasn't just a business issue. Stevie Wonder wasn't just another artist. He was a long-term investment, developed from childhood, carefully shaped, consistently profitable. Letting him go meant losing control over something they had spent a decade building. But Stevie understood something they didn't expect. His value was no longer in the system. It was in himself. What followed was not a rebellion built on emotion, but negotiation built on leverage. Stevie didn't disappear. He waited. He used the moment to demand something almost unheard of at the time: full creative control, ownership over his music, and access to the money that had been held in trust during his childhood. It was a risk on both sides. If he failed, he would lose everything. If Motown refused, they risked losing one of the most unique artists in the world. Motown agreed, but the deal was different now. Completely different. Stevie was no longer a product. He was a creator with authority, and he moved fast. In 1972, he released Music of My Mind, the first clear signal that something had changed. The sound was different, more experimental, less controlled, more personal. Then came Talking Book the same year, featuring Superstition, a track that didn't just succeed commercially, but redefined the use of rhythm and synthesizers in mainstream music. It wasn't polished in the Motown sense. It was raw, layered, alive. But Stevie wasn't slowing down. In 1973, Inner Visions pushed even further. The themes became darker, more political, more introspective. Songs addressed drug abuse, systemic inequality, and social tension. This was an entertainment designed to fit a format. This was an artist using his platform to say what he wanted, without filters. Then came the moment that confirmed everything. In 1976, Stevie released Songs in the Key of Life, a double album, ambitious, complex, deeply personal. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, a rare achievement at the time, and went on to become one of the most critically acclaimed albums in history. It wasn't just successful, it was definitive. Across this period, the numbers told a clear story: multiple Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year several times, millions of records sold worldwide, a level of influence that extended far beyond genre. But what mattered more was what those numbers represented. For the first time, Stevie Wonder controlled every layer of his work. He wrote the songs, arranged the compositions, produced the recordings, and performed many of the instruments himself. Synthesizers became tools for expression, not just effects. The studio became an extension of his mind. There were no intermediaries shaping the sound. What the audience heard was exactly what he intended, and the industry noticed. The same system that had once dictated his direction was now following his lead. Artists studied his approach. Producers adapted to his methods. Labels reconsidered how much control they allowed talent. Stevie Wonder wasn't just succeeding within the industry anymore. He was quietly reshaping it. On stage, the image was unmistakable. Dark glasses reflecting stage lights, head tilted back, body moving with a rhythm, hands moving across keys with precision and instinct. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just complete immersion in the music. To the audience, it looked like freedom, but control at that level comes with its own cost. Because when you are responsible for everything, every sound, every decision, every outcome, there is no one else to absorb the pressure, no one else to blame, no one else to hide behind. The boy who once had no control now had all of it. And that kind of power doesn't just elevate you, it isolates you. And isolation, over time, begins to change the way you see everything, even if you've never seen anything at all. In August 1973, at the height of his creative power, Stevie Wonder was traveling through North Carolina after performance when everything suddenly stopped. The car in front of him braked. The driver didn't react in time. The collision was violent. Stevie's head struck the windshield with such force that he was knocked unconscious instantly. For the next 4 days, he remained in a coma. At that moment, the man who had just taken control of his life lost all control again. When he finally woke up, the damage was more than physical. Doctors confirmed neurological trauma. He permanently lost part of his sense of smell. But the deeper impact was internal. Something had shifted. The world he had rebuilt on his own terms now felt fragile, unpredictable, and dangerously temporary. Before the accident, Stevie's life was already intense. After it, that intensity sharpened into something else. He went back to work. Quickly, almost too quickly. Instead of slowing down, he pushed harder into music, into creation, into control. The studio became not just a workspace, but a form of escape. When he was inside it, everything made sense. Every sound had structure. Every decision had logic. It was the one place where uncertainty could be eliminated. But outside that space, things were less stable. His personal life grew more complicated. Relationships formed and ended with little stability. Over time, Stevie would have 9 children with multiple women, a reality that remained largely separated from his public image. The world saw discipline, focus, and artistic brilliance. It did not see the fragmentation behind it, and that contrast became a pattern. Publicly, he was evolving into something larger than an artist. Privately, his life was becoming harder to organize, harder to contain. There were expectations coming from every direction: the label, the audience, the media, the broader cultural moment. Stevie Wonder wasn't just making music anymore. He was becoming a symbol of Black excellence in America, a symbol of artistic independence, a symbol of overcoming disability. Each of those identities carried weight. Together, they created pressure that never fully disappeared. Because symbols are not allowed to fail, there was no room for visible weakness, no space for collapse. The narrative around him was too important, too powerful, too useful. And once a person becomes a symbol, the system doesn't just support them. It depends on them staying exactly as they are. That meant Stevie had to maintain control at all times. Creatively, that control became absolute. He didn't just contribute to his music. He managed every layer of it. Writing, producing, arranging, performing. The responsibility was total. If something worked, it was because of him. If something failed, it would also be because of him. That kind of control creates a hidden isolation. There are fewer people you can trust, fewer people who can challenge you, fewer places where you can be uncertain without consequences. Over time, the circle gets smaller, the work gets heavier, the silence between projects gets louder. And for someone who had spent his entire life adapting to a world he couldn't see, that silence wasn't neutral. It amplified everything. By the late 1970s, the signs were subtle but present. The creative output, while still strong, slowed. The constant innovation of the earlier years became harder to sustain, not because the talent disappeared, but because the conditions that fueled it were changing. The industry was shifting, audiences were changing, and internally, Stevie was carrying more weight than ever before. There was also something else happening beneath the surface. For years, his identity had been defined in contrast to limitation, a blind artist who could do what others couldn't. But after achieving complete control, after proving everything he needed to prove, that contrast began to lose its function. The question was no longer whether he could succeed. It was what that success required him to maintain. And the answer was everything. Every decision had to be precise. Every project had to matter. Every public appearance had to reinforce the image. There was no version of Stevie Wonder that the world would accept as ordinary. And because of that, there was no safe place to step back. The internal conflict wasn't explosive. It didn't lead to public breakdowns or visible scandals. It was quieter than that, more controlled, but also more persistent. A constant tension between who he was expected to be and what it took to remain that person. Even his activism, which became more visible during this period, carried its own weight. His involvement in the campaign to establish Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a national holiday positioned him as more than an entertainer. He became a voice within a broader social movement. That role added meaning to his work, but it also added responsibility. Now, stepping away wasn't just a personal decision. It would have been a cultural one. And so, he didn't step away. He continued. He adapted. He adjusted the pace. But the underlying structure remained the same. Control at every level. Responsibility at every level. Expectation at every level. The boy who had once been controlled by the system had become the one holding everything together. And that came at a cost that wasn't immediately visible. Because when you spend your entire life building control, fighting for it, protecting it, maintaining it, you eventually reach a point where letting go feels more dangerous than holding on. Even if holding on is what's slowly wearing you down. After the accident in 1973, nothing in Stevie Wonder's life ever truly returned to what it was before. He survived. He continued. He even reached higher peaks. But something fundamental had shifted. Not in his talent, not in his ambition, but in the way he understood time, control, and purpose. For years, his life had been driven by momentum. Album after album, success after success. A constant forward motion that left no room for pause. But surviving a 4-day coma forced a different awareness. It introduced a question that hadn't existed before. What happens if everything stops again, and this time, instead of answering that question with more speed, Stevie began to respond with intention. The change wasn't loud. There was no public announcement, no dramatic reinvention. It showed up in quieter decisions, in the way he approached music, in the subjects he chose to write about, in the causes he decided to stand behind. One of the clearest turning points came through his growing role in social and political activism. Stevie Wonder was no longer just reflecting the world through music. He was actively trying to shape it. His campaign to make Martin Luther King Jr. Day a national holiday wasn't symbolic. It was persistent, strategic, and deeply personal. He organized, performed, spoke publicly, and used his influence to push the movement forward. This was a different kind of control, not control over sound or production or contracts, control over impact. And that shift changed the meaning of his work. Music was no longer just a space to escape pressure. It became a tool to process it, to redirect it, to give it structure beyond himself. Songs carried more weight, not just emotionally, but socially. The audience wasn't just listening anymore. They were being asked to think, to respond, to engage. At the same time, Stevie began to slow down his output, not because he had less to say, but because he was choosing more carefully what was worth saying. The gap between major releases grew longer. The perfectionism that once fueled his dominance now acted as a filter. Only the ideas that mattered most made it through, and that created a different kind of presence. He was no longer everywhere, but when he appeared, it meant something. There was also a deeper internal adjustment happening beneath the surface. For most of his life, Stevie's identity had been built on proving something. Proving that he could overcome blindness, proving that he could outgrow the system, proving that he could control his own narrative. But after reaching those milestones, the need to prove began to fade. What replaced it was quieter, more reflective, less about achievement, more about meaning. That doesn't mean the pressure disappeared. The expectations were still there. The legacy was still growing. The world still saw him as a symbol. But internally, the relationship to that pressure began to change. It was no longer something to fight against at full speed. It became something to manage, to live with. And that's where the idea of rebirth becomes more complicated, because this wasn't a reinvention in the traditional sense. Stevie Wonder didn't become a different person. He became a more aware version of the same person. Someone who understood both the power and the cost of everything he had built. The control was still there, but now, so was the awareness of its limits. He could shape music. He could influence culture. He could move millions of people. But he couldn't eliminate uncertainty. He couldn't prevent loss. He couldn't guarantee stability in his personal life. And accepting that changed the way he moved forward. Less urgency, more selectivity, less noise, more intention. From the outside, it looked like a slowdown. From the inside, it was an adjustment to something deeper. Because surviving the moment where everything almost ended forces a different question than success ever could. Not how far can this go, but what actually matters if it does. After redefining music, surviving a near-fatal accident, and reshaping his purpose, Stevie Wonder entered a phase that looked quieter on the surface, but carried a different kind of weight underneath. The pace slowed. The releases became less frequent. The spotlight, once constant, became something he stepped into more selectively. But when someone like Stevie Wonder steps back, is it retreat or control at a higher level? Through the 1980s and beyond, his presence didn't disappear. It evolved. He continued to release music, with albums like Hotter Than July and the global success of I Just Called to Say I Love You, which won an Academy Award in 1985. The numbers were still there. Millions of records sold. Global recognition. But the cultural position had shifted. He was no longer just competing within the industry. He had become part of its foundation. And that changes how the world treats you. You are no longer measured by hits alone. You are measured by impact over time. Stevie's influence extended far beyond charts. Artists across genres, from R&B to pop to hip-hop, studied his structure, his use of synthesizers, his control over production. What he had normalized in the 1970s became the standard in the decades that followed. The idea that an artist could write, produce, and perform at the highest level simultaneously was no longer rare. It was expected, because he had already done it. But legacy isn't only built through work. It's built through presence. And Stevie's presence carried contradictions. On one side, he was a global icon, a symbol of resilience, talent, and artistic independence. A man who had turned blindness into something that didn't limit him, but defined him in a way the world respected. On the other side, his personal life remained complex, often fragmented, largely kept out of the spotlight. Multiple relationships, multiple children, a structure that didn't always match the clarity of his public image. And that gap never fully closed. Because legacy doesn't erase complexity, it just reframes it. In later years, Stevie Wonder also became increasingly associated with humanitarian work and public causes. He performed at major global events, spoke on social issues, and remained connected to movements that extended beyond music. His voice carried authority, not because of volume, but because of history. When he spoke, people listened not just to what he said, but to what he had lived. At the same time, there were long periods of silence. No major releases, no constant media presence, just distance. For some artists, that kind of silence signals decline. For Stevie Wonder, it created something else. It created space. Space for the legacy to settle. Space for the influence to spread without interference. Space for the myth to grow. Because when an artist reaches a certain level, constant visibility can actually reduce impact. But absence, controlled, intentional absence, can make every return feel significant again. And that's what defined this phase of his life. not disappearance, but selective presence. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. The records, the awards, the influence, all of it had already been established. What remained was something less measurable, but more durable. How do people remember you when you're not constantly reminding them? For Stevie Wonder, the answer was already forming, not just as a musician, not just as a performer, but as a figure who changed how music is made, how artists see themselves, and how control could be taken back from a system that once defined you. And maybe that's the real shift, because early in his life, Stevie Wonder fought to gain control. In the middle, he mastered it, but in the end, he learned how to live without needing to prove it anymore. In the end, Stevie Wonder was never just a story about success. It was a story about control, who has it, who loses it, and who learns how to live without constantly proving it. From a blind child signed at 11, to a young artist trapped inside a system, to a man who broke that system and rebuilt it on his own terms, every phase of his life carried the same underlying tension, the fight to defy himself before the world could do it for him. He didn't just survive the industry, he reprogrammed it. He turned limitation into identity, and identity into power. But that power came at a cost: pressure, expectations, and a life that never fully aligned between what the public saw and what he lived privately. The contradictions never disappeared. They simply became part of the full picture. What makes his story last is not just the music or the awards or the influence. It's the evolution, the shift from needing recognition to controlling it, to eventually stepping beyond it. Very few artists reach that final stage, where their presence is no longer tied to output, but to impact that continues without effort. And that's where Stevie Wonder's legacy settles. Not as a man who constantly demanded attention, but as one who reached a level where attention followed him, even in silence. Because in the end, the most powerful position isn't being seen everywhere. It's knowing you don't have to be